Are you sure you know which is the strongest Bankai in Bleach? If you think it's Yamamoto's, you might be very mistaken. And today, I'm going to show you all the Bankais in Bleach ranked from weakest to strongest. And yes, this is an updated ranking with new Bankais and also some new abilities for Bankais we already knew about. After all, the last time I did this ranking was in 2022, and a lot has changed since then. So get ready, because there are a lot of surprises coming. There's even a Bankai that almost nobody has understood to this day. You want to know who really deserves the top spot in this ranking? Stick around till the end, because you're going to be surprised. And first, I need to give an honorable mention to the so-called Bankai of Rikoni Bujino, which appears in the novel Can't Fear Your Own World, better known as the Asahi novel. I say Bankai in quotes because it's not really clear what this form actually is. Rikoni just compares it to a Bankai resurrection, and that's why I thought I should bring it up here as an honorable mention. His Zanpakuto is Hikomi Kodomoi, which is so unusual that it wasn't even printed from an exhaust. Instead, Tokunada Tsuneyashiro gifted Rikoni with the unique Zanpakuto that was forged by Namaya to seal an ancient and powerful hollow that tried to devour the Soul King. Its most powerful form is called Hikomi Kodomoi Roraku Hake, where Rikoni merges with his Zanpakuto, revealing the full extent of his potential. His eyes darken, a third eye appears, his body is covered in black markings, and he releases a pure black Ryatsu. It's just insane. But anyway, honorable mention made. Now then, let's get to the full ranking of Bleach's Bankais, from the weakest to the strongest. And the weakest Bankai of all is Ryuman Hozukimaru, belonging to Madarame Ikkaku. When released, it even looks intimidating, with those giant blades connected by chains, looking like a medieval, beefed-up version of Nunchaku. However, this Bankai has a slight problem. Besides the power boost, it doesn't offer any special abilities or unique defensive properties. It just releases a bit of Reiatsu throughout the fight to make the attack stronger. Ryuman Hozukimaru has a dragon symbol that gets filled in with crimson ink during battle, and the more Ikkaku fights, the more complete the symbol becomes, and the more powerful the weapon gets. The explanation for this is that, according to Ikkaku himself, his Bankai is kinda lazy. It only really wakes up after he takes or lands enough hits. So yes, it's a Bankai that needs a warm-up before it can reach its full potential. Once it's fully activated, the increase in strength is considerable, but there are no special abilities or extra defenses. Additionally, the crest fills up faster if he keeps spinning the Ryuman Hozukimaru, but if the enemy isn't as dumb as Edrad Leon's, they could attack Ikkaku while he's spinning it. Not to mention, if he faces a powerful enemy before reaching full power, Ikkaku could lose before even hitting his peak. And it's worth remembering that, according to Mayuri, after being destroyed by Edrad and somehow rebuilt by Haken, Ikkaku's Bankai became considerably weaker, so there's really no way around it. It was the weakest Bankai of all. Next up, we have Renji's Hihio Zabimaru. The incomplete Bankai of the 6th Division's lieutenant transforms Zabimaru into a much larger version of its Shikai, resembling a snake made of bones. The structure extends in several segments that are spiritually connected, and the weapon also has a giant snake head capable of dealing heavy damage, both with its bites and with direct impact. A great advantage of Hihio Zabimaru is its flexibility in combat, where Renji can separate the segments of the weapon and reconnect them at will. Even if a part is damaged, he can reform the Bankai and keep fighting. And Hihio Zabimaru also has special techniques. One of them is the Rikotsu Taiho, a beam of spiritual energy fired from the snake's mouth, and another technique is the enhanced version of his Shikai special move, the Higazeko, where all the segments detach, glow with spiritual energy, and attack the enemy in a coordinated way, dealing damage from all sides. But despite having good offensive potential, this is still an incomplete Bankai, and according to Mayuri himself, parts of it were damaged and never fully regenerated, which is why it holds this position in the ranking. Next is Sasakebi's Kokengruya Hikyu, and as soon as Chojiro activates his Bankai, dark clouds gather in the sky, and from the blade of his Zanpakuto, he summons a dome of lightning connected to the ground by dozens of pillars of energy, while a single beam shoots up toward the sky. It's as if he summoned his own storm. And honestly, nobody wants to be caught in the middle of that. Interestingly, the sword itself doesn't change shape. It stays the same as the Shikai, which makes this Bankai one of the few cases where that happens. The fact is, Kokenguryu Hikyu alters the weather around it, in a way similar to how Toshiro's Hirimaru does. But instead of ice, we're talking about thunder and electrical storms. With every swing of his blade, Sasakabe can direct devastating lightning strikes at his enemies, and on top of that, he can channel the lightning directly into his sword, making his close combat attacks even more dangerous. It's worth remembering that 2,000 years ago, this Bankai was strong enough to leave scars on Yamamoto's forehead. However, since we saw very little of it and didn't really get to see its full potential, it's going to stay in this position. Next, we have Kensei's Taiken Takikaza, a captain who doesn't mess around and usually releases his Bankai right at the start of a fight. However, Kubo was really harsh with it. Both times he used his Bankai in the series, it simply failed to accomplish its mission. He didn't defeat Wonderweiss, and he also didn't defeat Master Masculine. But talking about the Bankai itself, the Tachikise stops being just a simple knife and transforms into two huge blades, one in each of Kensei's hands. In addition, his arms become covered with segmented purple bands, as if you were wearing partial armor, and his special ability channels all the destructive power of Kensei's Shikai directly into the Bankai. This explosive power keeps attacking his opponent indefinitely as long as his fist remains in contact with him. However, it's not a Bankai that needs to fight up close to the enemy, which makes it one of the weakest Bankais in my opinion, and also a limited one. Next, we have Komamura's Kokujo Tengen Mio, and here, most Shinigami summon the power of their Zanpakuto. However, Komamura is a bit different. He summons a giant samurai in full armor. When he activates his Bankai, it brings forth the spiritual avatar that's about 100 meters tall. The warrior is covered in heavy armor, has the look of a classic samurai, and wields a sword similar to his master's but on a much larger scale. And his special ability is that the giant mimics all of Komamura's movements. This turns every strike the captain makes into an amplified and devastating version with power proportional to the giant's size. And despite its size, Kokujo Tengen Myo is also incredibly fast since it copies Komamura's movements instantly. During the fight against Berrigan's Fraction, for example, he caught Acera with his bare hands without taking any damage. And in the battle against Tosen, it was able to shatter the Vizard's arm with just a single blow. However, it has a major weakness. Any damage the giant takes is reflected directly onto Komamura's body. In other words, if the Colossus gets slashed in the chest, the captain bleeds as well. This makes the Bankai a double-edged sword. It has a lot of raw power, but any mistake comes at a high price. On the other hand, if Komamura is healed, the giant samurai also regenerates, thanks to the spiritual link between the two. But honestly, it's a Bankai that really has a major weakness. And for me, it fairly deserves this spot here. Moving on, we have Mayuri's Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo, the first version. And when it comes to bizarre Bankai, this one probably takes the trophy. Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo isn't just weird, it's a true work of biological horror, custom made by one of the most insane scientists in the Soul Society, a golden caterpillar with a giant baby head, human arms, and bells. And this Bankai breathes out a highly toxic poison made from Mayuri's own blood. This poisonous gas spreads within a radius of up to 200 meters, affecting everything and everyone, except Mayuri himself and Nemu. The thing is, you don't even need to breathe to be affected. The poison gets into your body no matter what. And to make things worse, Mayuri can alter its composition. In other words, you can't get used to it, build up immunity, or create a permanent antidote. But that's not all, my friends. Besides the poison, Ashisogi Jizo was also physically dangerous. The creature can create several blades that extend from its body to impale the enemy if it manages to pierce them. Not to mention, it can also devour the enemy. But the mobility of this Bankai is a big drawback. And for me, that's a major negative point, which is why it ranks here in this position. Moving on, we have Soifan's Jakuho Raiko Ben, which is basically a golden bazooka attached to her right arm, complete with a face shield, homing missile, and an explosion that looks like it came straight out of a war zone. The appearance of this Bankai doesn't lie. It's a long-range weapon of total destruction, and as Soifan herself has made clear, she hates using it. According to the captain, the Jakuho Raikoben goes against everything a member of the Amatsuki-Do values: discretion, speed, and silent precision. After all, it's hard to go unnoticed when you're carrying a missile bigger than your own body on your shoulder. And as I mentioned earlier, how it works is straightforward. She raises the weapon, aims using the slits in her face guard, and fires. And the missile tracks the enemy like a real guided projectile and explodes with absurd force. The explosion is so powerful that it has been able to break barriers created by Hadagen, one of the best Kido users in the series. And it was also able to injure enemies like Berrigan and the Quincy BG9. The thing is, before the 1,000-year Blood War arc, the recoil from the explosion was so strong that it could even launch Soifan herself far away, even with the steel band holding her to the ground. Besides that, she used to say she could only fire one missile every 3 days, but these limitations seem to have been overcome in the final arc, since she's been spamming her Bankai like it's nothing. Next up, we have a controversial one, Tosen Suzumushi's Suishiki Enma Kurogi. When activated, 10 rings are launched around the area and form a huge black dome. And inside this dome, which Tuzan calls Mimio, all of the enemy's senses are erased. Sight, hearing, smell, and even spiritual perception. Only touch remains, meaning you only realize you've been hit after it's already happened. Inside the Emma Kurogi, Tosin moves around normally, wielding his Zanpakuto in its sealed form as usual, and the field created by his Bankai doesn't affect him. The effect is like a simulation of total blindness. However, of course, nothing's perfect. If someone touches the hilt of Tosin's sword, they automatically regain all their senses. And this is the main flaw of Enma Kurogi, which was very well exploited by Zaraki. Moving on, we have Roshi's Kenshin Ryobutodan, and when activated, Kenshinryo turns into a visual spectacle. The golden strings of the Zanpai 2 shape themselves into tall, ornate figures known as the Troupe of the Dance of Death. Meanwhile, music with gamelan sounds echoes in the background, and then the real show begins. Kenshinryo Butodan uses music as a weapon. As the melody plays, Roshi conducts the dance with his baton, and everything the opponent sees, feels, and fears becomes real. The illusions created are not just beautiful visions. They cause real physical pain, from burns to the sensation of drowning. And as Roshi explains, if the enemy's heart is captured by the music, they can't escape. And so he used a few techniques. The first is Sea Drift, where the dancers create the illusion of a whirlpool that traps the enemy, causing the sensation and effects of drowning. The second technique is Prometheus, a dance surrounded by flames, where the enemy is swallowed by an illusory fire, but one that leaves real burns. And finally, there's the third technique, Ein Heldenleben, which means a hero's life, and Roshi planned to finish off Maska Masculine with this performance. However, the Stern Ritter was faster and destroyed his own eardrums to block out the music, which reveals the weakness of this Bankai. If the opponent doesn't hear the music, the illusions don't work. Next up is Hitsugaya's incomplete Daigaren Hyorinmaru. When he activates his Bankai, Hyorinmaru's ice covers his body, creating wings, claws, a tail, and a dragon's head on his arm. It's like he actually becomes a dragon boy. On top of that, 3 ice flowers with 4 petals each flow behind him. And before Hitsugaya improved his Bankai, if those flowers completely melted, the Bankai would have harmed him. This is according to the creator himself, T. Kubo. However, the true power of this technique is that Hitsugaya can freeze anything using his Bankai's abilities. And some of his techniques are as follows. Zanyo Ningyo allows Hitsugaya to create an identical copy of himself made of ice, perfect for confusing the enemy, but it only works once. With the Ryasenka technique, after stabbing the opponent with a sword, the captain releases an explosion of ice directly into the target's body and then shatters everything, ice and enemy together. With Sen and Hyoro, a series of ice pillars appear around the opponent, and with a swing of the sword, they close in, crushing the enemy completely. With the Ryaton Hakaso technique, snowflakes fall from the sky like snow, and if one of these flakes touches the target, flowers bloom on their body and freeze them completely. And when the 100th petal falls, death would be inevitable, impeccable, even though it hasn't killed anyone. After all, Harabel walked out of there just fine. And that's what makes me rank this Bankai a little lower on the list, because even though it's impressive, in terms of achievements, it really hasn't killed anyone important. But of course, in my opinion, it's one of the most versatile Bankai in the series. Moving on, we have Ichigo's fake Tensa-Zenjutsu. Unlike most Bankai, which summon giant beasts or massive explosions, Ichigo's fake Bankai stands out for its simplicity and lethality. Tensa Zangetsu shortens his sword and turns it into a sleek, sharp black daito with a crossguard forming the Manji symbol. His battle cloak changes to a black coat with a red lining. The fake Bankai is made for close quarters combat at extremely high speed, amplifying Ichigo's already immense strength to explosive levels. With Tensa Zangetsu, Ichigo compresses his power to unleash superhuman speeds. His movements become almost invisible. He's so fast that he creates multiple afterimages to confuse his opponents. His natural physical strength always increases drastically. He can even block brutal attacks like the punches from the powerful Espada Yami Yao and cut through Hiero with ease. On top of that, he can also fire a black Getsuga Tensho, which is a more advanced version of the Getsuga Komen, causing truly massive damage. Not to mention, I haven't even said that he can keep the Getsuga's energy in his sword so that his direct strikes become even more powerful. What's interesting is that by compressing his power, Ichigo can keep his Bankai active for long periods of time. And it's no wonder he managed to stay in Bankai state for 3 months while training in the Dangai with his father. And next is the Daiguren Hirinmaru as well, but this time in its holified form. When Urahara handed over the special pill capable of forcing the recovery of the captain's Bankai that had been stolen, the hollow essence present in the pill completely transformed Yorinmaru. A diagonal band of ice crosses Hitsugaya's chest, resembling a dragon's tail. His face is now covered by an ice mask with a hollow-like appearance, covering half his face with a hole at the eye. From the top of his head, 2 ice horns grow, as if something primal were emerging from within. In this new form retains all the techniques and properties of the incomplete Bankai. However, now everything is amplified by Hollow Ryatsu. Next is Jinjo Kugo's Bankai, whose name was never revealed. In this form, Jinjo's body's wrapped in a bone-like armor pressed tightly against the skin. The fur in his jacket now turns red. His hair and eyebrows become white. His eyes have white irises with red sclera. His face is marked by a red cross behind him. 4 long branches of energy expand in an X shape, serving as wings, and his sword changes completely. The blade now has a core divided by a hollow bone. His Bankai raises his spiritual pressure to the maximum, to the point of rivaling Ichigo in full-bring Bankai. And his sword also retains the use of Getsuga Tensho, since he had stolen Ichigo's powers. Another detail is that with the tip of his sword, Jinju is able to concentrate spiritual energy and then fire it in a brutal beam of destruction, which looks a lot like a Sero, but there's no confirmation if it really was one. The next Bankai here is Ichigo's Tensuzangetsu Fullbring, because after the influence of the remaining traces of his Fullbring, his Bankai underwent a remarkable transformation. In addition to his Shihai Hakusho changing, the blade of Tensuzangetsu becomes longer and more curved, with an irregular guard that keeps the manji shape, a longer chain connecting the sword to the hilt and Ichigo's glove. And well, just like Hitsugai's Bankai, this new Bankai of Ichigo retains the abilities of the false Bankai, extreme speed, brutal strength, and a devastating black Getsuga Tensho, but takes them to a whole new level. He was even able to go head-to-head with Yuach in his base form, even though he was extremely exhausted. And what's interesting is that the anime made an addition here. In moments of rage, Ichigo's Ryatsu intensifies, turning red and black, even crackling with lightning. Next up, we have Isagi Shunhei's Fushino Kojo. When he activates his Bankai, the 2 blades connected by Kazushini's chains are reconfigured into a new, brutal and symbolic form. The chains wrap around Isagi's neck and extend until they connect to a huge black orb of interwoven chains that floats just above his head. The environment around him changes drastically. The Rishi becomes dense and stagnant, as if the air itself stopped flowing. An atmosphere that, according to reports, recreates the conditions of the world from millions of years ago. Isagi connects his soul to his enemies through the chains attached to both of their necks. From that moment on, any wound inflicted on either of them is instantly healed. However, the price is steep. The Ryatsu of both is drained equally to recover, no matter what the blow is, since they essentially become immortal. And this Bankai is basically the same as the battlefield. However, the trick is that both will die together if the Bankai remains active when their Ryatsu runs out, which requires outside help for Isagi to end the fight. In other words, it's a Bankai that allows Isagi to fight against enemies stronger than himself, but in return it only forces a draw. And it's a pretty controversial Bankai. Many people think it should be ranked very high, while others think it should be much lower. And since I see a lot of positives, as well as negatives, I believe this middle position is the best option for it. But tell me what you think in the comments. Because moving on, we have Rukia's Hakano Togame, where upon activating her Bankai, her body undergoes a drastic transformation. She starts wearing an ornate white kimono with transparent ice covering her shoulders, and her hair and irises become completely white. A partial ice crown surrounds the back of her head, and her Zanpakuto keeps the shape of its Shikai form, but now it's made entirely of pure, translucent ice. Hakano Togame drastically increases the range and intensity of Rukia's ability to reach absolute zero. And when this Bankai is released, a pillar of cold mist rises from her body, signaling the mass freezing of the surrounding area. With a single gesture, Rukia unleashes a massive wave of icy cold, similar to her Hakuren technique, but much more powerful, instantly freezing anything in its path to absolute zero. Any direct physical contact with Rukia also causes freezing, even to her allies. Despite its power, Hakano Togame is a Bankai that's very difficult to control, because it brings her body to absolute zero, so she needs to raise and lower her temperature gradually or she risks injuring herself. And all of this happens because it's a newly awakened Bankai, meaning Rukia still has a lot of room to grow. That's why I placed her here in this position. And since I mentioned Rukia, next up is Renji's Bankai, the Sou Zabimaru. When he activates this form, Renji takes on a wilder and more compact appearance, which is very different from the skeletal and awkward form of Heiyo Zabimaru. Now he wields a gauntlet that resembles a snake skull, with a long bony tail that extends behind his body. The big advantage of this Bankai is that, unlike the previous one, it can cut and make great use of explosive elements, but even so, Renji's essence is still there. And of course, this Bankai isn't just visually more stylish, it also brings several new techniques. The first is Hihyo, which is a giant skeletal arm that mimics the movements of Renji's left arm. It's strong enough to lift walls and toss enemies around like they're dolls, and it can even withstand an Ishida's Hikatorengi. The arm can also release flames from the protrusion on Renji's shoulder, adding more power to his strikes, almost like a turbocharged punch. With the Orochio technique, the bone structure unravels, forming a large blade with serrated edges. and Renji can use it as a regular sword or attach it to his arm and wield it similarly to his old Bankai, which makes this Bankai quite versatile. And of course there's more. This blade can heat up to the point of melting solid stone, and can also cause explosions on direct impact. With the Zagatepu technique, after piercing the enemy, the lieutenant twists the blade like a key and activates jaws of spiritual energy that snap shut. Then they unleash an explosion capable of reducing the target to ashes. With the Zazakar technique, the Bankai's blade is transformed into a segmented version similar to the Shikai, like a whip made of blades. With the Hid-Tensho technique, the lieutenant loses his hood, but from it several skeletal hands emerge to hold the enemy in place. It's basically a massive grab that allows him to set up the next attack. With the Geisuko, the skeletal arm spins Orochio above Renji's head until it forms a large disc of spiritual energy, and when thrown, the attack explodes with enough force to leave a crater in the ground. It even caught the attention of Zaraki and Mayuri. But there's a catch. This attack needs to be charged for 20 seconds, so if the enemy somehow manages not to get caught during that time, Renji is at a big disadvantage. Next up is Hirako Sakashima Yokoshima Happo Fuzigari. And right after the release, a gigantic golden flower appears around Shinji, really opening up like an upside-down lotus flower, and its petals completely envelope the captain's body. And from the top of this flower, a pale pink mist quickly spreads across the battlefield, covering a wide area around Shinji, and that's how Sakashima Yokoshima Happo Fuzigari reveals its lethality. It is capable of affecting all living beings within its range, whether they're allies or enemies. The released mist distorts the perception of friend and foe, thus reversing their intentions. Allies attack each other and enemies become friends. This was shown twice. The first time was in Asagi's novel, where Hirako made an army of hollows completely destroy themselves. And in the anime, he used this Bankai against several Quincy soldiers who also killed each other. And interestingly, Shinji is the only one immune to the mist's effect because he stays inside the flower. However, this is a Bankai not made for one-on-one duels, but rather to defeat entire groups, since if it's used in a one-on-one, the opponent will see Shinji as an ally. But at the same time, the captain can't attack because he's inside the flower. In other words, just like Asagi's Bankai, it also stirs up some controversy, because many people think it should be at the top of the list due to its effect, which really could end the war in an instant. However, others think it should be ranked lower or be useless in a one-on-one. And in my opinion, it is indeed a very powerful Bankai, but it's very situational. I believe that, just like Asagi's Bankai, the middle of the so-called ranking is the best place for it, and that's why it stays in this position. Next up is Kriya-Shiki Kenpachi's Gagaku Kairo. This Bankai was revealed only in the novel Spirits Are Forever With You, better known as the Asashiro novel. And when he releases his Bankai, the ground around Kriya-Shiki violently breaks apart, as if an entire world is being devoured. From there, a colossal pair of monstrous jaws emerges, devouring everything in their path except for Kriya-Shiki himself. And the presence of this Bankai was so destructive and uncontrollable that Central 46 forbade the captain from releasing it within the Serete. It's truly a very powerful Bankai, but it doesn't rank higher on the list because it has a major weakness. After using it, Kriya-Shiki can only use it again 6 months later. Because next up is the Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo Matai Fukuin Shoutai, Mayuri's modified Bankai. My friend, if his first Bankai already seemed like it came straight out of a nightmare laboratory, this version is simply the definition of how things can always get worse. This Bankai takes the form of a giant baby. The special ability of this Bankai is to create modified versions of Ashisogi Jizu with specific properties to nullify or destroy the opponent, using very unique abilities based on the data Mayuri sends to it. For example, against Pernita, the enemy who manipulates nerves with his Oko Kosoryo ability, Mayuri created a Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizu with nerves on the surface of its body divided into 70,000 independent layers. These layers would detach one by one whenever Pernita tried to control the nerves, basically making the creature's body impossible to dominate. And to make sure Pernita wouldn't multiply after being swallowed, Mayuri even programmed the creature to be born without teeth so it could swallow him whole. Next, we have Unohana's Minazuki. When activating her Bankai, the captain slides her hand along Minazuki's blade and the sword liquefies, turning into a thick, viscous red substance. This same liquid starts gushing around Unohana, enough to completely flood the battlefield, at least in the Mukin, which was the place where Zaraki fought her. By swinging her sword, Unohana can unleash waves of liquid blades that travel at insane speeds and in constant succession. With a quick spin of her blade, she can also create a sphere of sharp liquid blades, defending herself from enemy attacks. And while her Bankai is active, Unohana can instantly heal any wound she suffers without needing to use healing Kido. It's also worth mentioning that there's a debate in the fandom about whether this Bankai corrodes the enemy or not. I went into more detail about this in the Unohana analysis video, and the link to watch it is in the description. Next, we have Gen's Kamishini no Yari, where he can extend his sword up to 13 kilometers in length and retract it at an absurd speed of 500 times the speed of sound. This happens in less than 0.08 seconds, making it practically impossible to react to the attack. Seriously, this Bankai is so powerful that just one strike from Jin could easily cut an entire city in half. In his most basic attacks, he basically used two techniques: Buto, which is a technique where Jin uses the full extension and retraction of Kamishini no Yari, and Buto Renji, which is a series of Buto strikes executed in rapid succession. But the thing is, it seems like Jin lied about this ability. It's not that it's the fastest or the longest. Actually, it's not quite as he said. The deadliest aspect of his Bankai is the Kurose technique, because when the Kamishini no Yari extends and retracts, it turns to dust for a brief moment, and in that instant, Gin can leave a fragment of the blade inside the opponent's body. At any time, he can activate its poison by saying the release command, Kurose Kamishini no Yari, causing the enemy to dissolve from the inside out, cell by cell, with no chance to defend themselves. Seriously, this Bankai is so absurd that it was able to affect Aizen Kunpo Yuku, who was at such a high level of spiritual pressure that just passing by an ordinary soul would completely disintegrate it. Moving on, we have Komomura's Kokujo Tengen Mio Dangai Joei. Unlike the original form, here the spiritual colossus throws away its armor, and what remains is a body made entirely of Rishi, with a grotesque, almost demonic appearance, as if Komomura's rage had taken on a form of its own. The fight against Bambietta proved it to be the perfect counterattack to her explosive power. Since the Colossus's body doesn't contain solid Rishi, her bombs have nothing to detonate. Even if it's damaged, the giant regenerates almost instantly, making this Bankai practically invulnerable to physical damage. However, this form comes at a very high price. To reach this level, Komomaro used the humanization technique, transforming his body into a human body, and here his body is nothing more than an empty shell. The secret technique allows his clan to obtain an immortal body by offering up their heart. Therefore, as long as he is human, he can never die. But since he gave in to his desire for revenge, Captain Viralata became a complete dog, and his Bankai disappeared since he was no longer a Shinigami. Yes, this Bankai is very powerful, and it's worth mentioning that it doesn't have a time limit. It all depends on whether Komomoro will give in to his revenge or not. And finally, opening our top 10, we have Byakuya Senbonzakura Kagayoshi, which to me is one of the most versatile Bankai of all and is very underrated. Basically, Senbonzakura Kagayoshi massively amplifies Byakuya's Shikai, releasing 100 million tiny blades controlled by his mind, with even greater speed and guided by his hands. The blades float like a storm of petals, capable of destroying, surrounding, protecting, and cutting with surgical precision. Byakuya can also rearrange them into specific shapes, optimizing his offensive and defensive strategy according to the enemy. One technique, Gokei, forms a dome of blades that completely envelops the enemy. No blind spots, no escape. The blades attack from every direction, annihilating anything inside. The final impact is so devastating that it destroyed the tower where Byakuya was fighting Zamari in the Hueco Mundo arc. With the Senkei technique, the true form of Senbonzakura, Byakuya abandons defense completely, focusing solely on physical combat. The petals come together to form several swords around the enemy, marking the area for combat. Each sword has extreme destructive power, and Byakuya summons them one by one into his hands. However, after training in the royal palace, his Senkei evolved to contain up to 6 duplicated rows of swords, increasing its range and complexity. Byakuya was then able to use the Ika Senjika technique, which is the final strike of a Senkei. Here, all the swords around are launched simultaneously in a devastating attack. This strike was strong enough to reduce Gerard Valkyrie's head to dust, even in his divine form. And finally, there's the Shunkei Hakti Kane technique, where Byakuya condenses all the swords into a single white blade of absolute power. Large wings of white energy also form on his back, along with a vertical halo, giving him the appearance of an angelic or imperial being. With this, Byakuya attacks with his full strength using the single sword. In short, it's a Bankai that's very strong in attack and defense, it's versatile, it's fast, has both short and long range, and for me, these are qualities that put it here in the top 10. In 9th place, we have Urahara's Kanan Baraki Hinahime Aratame, and when he releases his Bankai, Urahara doesn't wield a colossal weapon, nor does he unleash a destructive energy. Instead, behind him rises an immense, majestic feminine figure wearing a revealing crimson cloak, with dark hair braided into elaborate loops, mannequin-like arms, and a solemn expression. Throughout the entire use of his Bankai, Urahara keeps his sword in the Shikai form, and so Kanan Baraki Hinahime Aratame has a single ability, to modify anything it touches, whether to destroy or to restore, serving both for attack and support. And its effect manifests as if it were a dissection, opening up physical structures and then reconstructing them in new states. The Bankai can dissect material objects and even people. Asuken's arm itself was quickly cut off, although it's a fact that when he moved away, it returned to normal. In addition, Urahara can also pass through barriers or open up space as if it were fabric, creating passages and tactile manipulations on the battlefield, just like he did to open a path for Grimmjow to catch Asuken by surprise. Additionally, this Bankai can heal critical injuries by restructuring destroyed tissues, as demonstrated when he rebuilt his own eyes after losing them. It can also enhance parts of allies' bodies, as he did by restructuring his own arm to maximize brute strength in combat against Asuken. In 8th place, Hitsugaya's matured Daigur and Hiryumaru. After his battle against Aizen, Hitsugaya didn't stop. He dedicated 18 months to intense training to bring his Bankai to its peak, its complete mature form. And Hitsugaya reaches this form when the last ice petal of his Bankai melts. That's when he becomes an adult, with his body and Bankai reflecting his full maturity and power. And here, Hitsugaya can instantly freeze gigantic objects with a simple hand gesture. Not only does the ice form quickly, but he has complete control over everything he freezes. This is the ultimate evolution of his Bankai. Now, Hitsugaya doesn't just freeze things physically, he suspends all inherent functions of whatever's frozen, whether it's special abilities, spiritual properties, or granted powers. A striking example was during the fight against Gerard, when Hitsugaya was able to freeze the Hoffnung sword in half, nullifying its ability to reflect damage, which comes from the Quincy Miracle ability. And by focusing his power, Hitsugaya freezes all matter in the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and wind, in just seconds. And the thing is, just like Rukia's Bankai, anyone who touches Hitsugaya can also be completely frozen. In 7th place, Zaraki's unnamed Bankan. When Zaraki unleashes this power, a colossal wave of Ryatsu explodes around him, tearing the environment apart as if it were made of paper. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and his appearance underwent a brutal transformation. Zaraki's skin turned as red as boiling blood. Black marks spread across his face and curved horns emerged from his forehead, evoking the image of an Oni, a demon from Japanese folklore. This form is wild, chaotic, almost primitive, as if Zaraki's most brutal and destructive essence had taken physical shape. His Bankai doesn't grant him elaborate techniques. It simply offers pure, unrestrained physical destruction, raw, absurd power. Zaraki can split a giant enemy like Gerald Valkyrie in half with a single blow. He tore off his limb using only his teeth and cut him in half from the same distance. But the biggest weakness of his Bankai is that not even Kenpachi's monstrous body can withstand so much power for long. During his fight against Gerald, when he unleashed too much power, his right arm literally started to break apart. In 6th place, Katemkyo Kotsu Karamatsu Shinju of Kyoraku Shinsui. When he activates his Bankai, black pine roots painted in ink spread out around him. Behind him, the figure of his Zanpakuto, Cotton, rises like a silent actress on a dark stage. The atmosphere changes, the light fades, and the sky becomes a yellow rectangular panel, like the curtains of an old theater. The world around Shinsui and his opponent plunges into cold desolation and deep melancholy, as if time itself had stopped to watch the performance. Shinsui's Bankai isn't just a technique, it's like a horror play, divided into 4 acts. When he activates it, Shinsui and his opponent become characters in a story about love, regret, and death. The double suicide of the lovers. The first act is called Hesitation of the Shared Wound, and here, any wound inflicted by one also appears on the other, as if hurting the other is the same as hurting yourself. The second act is the Pillow of Shame, and in this stage, dark stains appear as physical shame on the enemy's body, causing them to bleed profusely, as if it were truly an incurable disease. The third act is the Abyss of Separation, or Severe Abyss. Here, both are submerged in a dark, bottomless sea, slowly sinking with no way out as their Ryatsu is drained, and the one whose Ryatsu is completely depleted will begin to drown. And finally, there is a final act, the thread-cutting scissors on a blood-stained throat, where after sheathing their swords, Shinsui wraps the enemy's throat with invisible white thread, winding it around again and again, then gently pulls it, causing the enemy's throat to burst. In 5th place, Azashiro's Yozakuro, which also only appears in the novel Spirits Are Forever With You. And what's interesting is that Yozakuro is a Bankai completely different from all the others. It's always active, and this Bankai basically allows Azashiro to merge with everything around him. His body, mind, and spirit are connected to everything. The ground, the air, objects, and even other people. He can merge with the environment and control it at will. He can hear, see, and feel everything that happens in the space he's merged with, whether it's something physical, spiritual, or mental, since he's made any part of the Serete an extension of himself. With this, Azashiro is able to know everything that happens around him as if it were part of his own body. With the Seitu Yugo technique, this Bankai can merge Azashiro's body with his opponents and destroy them from the inside, directly targeting vital organs, just like he did when he killed the previous Kenpachi Kuryashiki. With the Utsutsu technique, because he merged with the Giga stockpile from the Research Institute, Azashiro was able to manifest parts of his own body at various points on the battlefield and use hundreds of Kido spells simultaneously, including techniques from Hado no Nintase like Itokaso, without needing to sacrifice any part of his body. He can also become invisible by merging with the air, as well as teleport over great distances and cut down enemies without moving his body or using a Zanpakuto. Despite being extremely powerful, Yozakuro has serious drawbacks. Since the Bankai has been active for more than 250 years, Azashiro's physical body can no longer be trained, becoming atrophied and weak. He was invulnerable to Rishi absorption attacks as well as to the Espada Picro's deprivation. And look, the thing is, when he merges with living enemies, Azashiro suffers severe internal injuries. In other words, it's a Bankai that's really powerful. However, it has weaknesses that even the weakest enemies can deal with it, which to me is a pretty big nerf, and that's why it ranks here in 5th place. Because in 4th place, we have Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi, where the blade of this Bankai takes the form of an ancient katana, worn and severely burned by fire. When the Bankai is activated, all the flames produced by Rujinjaka are absorbed into the blade, focusing its power into the cut. The sword burns everything it cuts to the point of completely erasing its existence, leaving no trace behind. In addition, the Bankai also generates a wave of heat so intense that it dries up all the moisture in an area the size of the Serete, melts even the ice from Toshiro's Bankai, and Unohana believed that the flames could incinerate the entire Soul Society if they were maintained for too long. And so Zanka no Tachi grants Yamamoto 4 distinct techniques, each named after the cardinal directions of the real world: east, west, south, and north. With the technique East Edge of the Rising Sun, which is already unleashed when the Bankai is activated, the blade concentrates all the sword's fire along its edge, eradicating anything it touches. Even the Quincy's Blute Vein cannot withstand it. With the technique West, behind the present of the remaining sun, Yamamoto envelops his body in extreme heat exceeding 15 million degrees, making any physical contact impossible. With the technique South, the great procession of 10 trillion dead burials, Yamamoto drives his sword into the ground and summons the ashen corpses of those slain by his flames to fight on his behalf. However, from what was shown, these skeletons are not that strong physically. They only serve to slow down the enemy or cause some psychological effect, as we saw with Yuacha's clone, who saw his former allies among the corpses used against him. And finally, there's the technique North, the Tenshi Kaijin, where the sky and earth end in ashes, where a slash of concentrated fire and heat is unleashed by Yamamoto, incinerating everything it touches. In summary, this Bankai is basically almost a perfect attack and perfect defense, and it only doesn't rank higher because the next 3 are truly insane. Because 3rd place goes to Senjumaru Shitatsu Karagama Shikarami no Jutsu. When she activates her Bankai, darkness envelops Senjumaru as a huge Tori appears on the ground, and she extends her skeletal arms in prayer toward the Tori, which transforms into a gigantic golden loom. In this way, endless strips of red fabric unroll into a carpet and connected panels, forming a huge tapestry that surrounds and defines the area, creating a barrier of cloth with detailed patterns and hanging fabrics. She then gains the ability to control the space within her Bankai, manipulating the cloths and tapestries. And with these fabrics, she can literally weave anything, from lava to ice, lightning. She even wove an army of hollows. Not to mention, she can travel through the tapestry. It's just insane. However, perhaps her most powerful technique is the one that allows her to seal her enemies within tapestries, as well as seal their fates. In 2nd place, we have Ichibei's Shirafude Ichimonji, which he doesn't release using the term Bankai. He uses the term Tenet, which means true blade, since his Zanpakuto Ichimonji was the first Zanpakuto to reach this evolved form, long before the term Bankai even existed. And when he activates it, the brush blade of Ichibei transforms into white bristles similar to its sealed state, but instead of black ink, it emits an intense white energy. With Shirafude Ichimonji, he can write kanji directly onto his target's bodies, and these altered names grant the target properties and powers corresponding to the meaning of the written name. By renaming the Quincy King as Black Ant, he became as weak and powerless as an ant. Another case was when Ichibei changed the name of the hollow to Ikomi Kodomo, thus draining much of its power and condemning it to servitude. However, despite the immense power of Ichimonji, its effectiveness decreases against beings who possess the power of the Soul King. Ikomi Kodomo, for example, managed to break free from the Bankai's curse after consuming fragments of the king. And finally, we have Ichigo's true Tensu-Zangetsu. It's like a fusion of all 4 races: Shinigami, Hollow, Quincy, and Human, since he literally fuses his 2 swords into a single blade. And although the true power of Tensu-Zangetsu is currently unknown, Yawash, with the powers of the Soul King, considered it dangerous enough to require breaking it immediately after its release. Later, when this Bankai was restored, even though Ichigo wasn't at full power, his Getsu potential was so powerful that it split Yawachi in half and actually killed him. Yes, with just one strike, the Bankai was able to kill a being who was basically a god. However, the villain came back to life because of the diamond, which allowed him to rewrite his own death. Simply bizarre, and that's why it takes the top spot here. But of course, that's just my opinion, and you are free to disagree. In fact, I'd really love to know what your complete ranking would look like, or at least your top 10. Leave a comment down below. I'd really like to hear your opinion.